Hey everyone, welcome back to Side 9. I'm Riella.
And I'm Fulminatus.
This past weekend has been a wild ride for Gundam Card Game. The Orlando Regional just happened this past Saturday, and the winning deck is Blue-Red Anti-Meta, with 4th place being on the same 47 out of 50 card shell. Something few of us saw coming. Also, I was present at this tournament.
But before we get rolling like Athrun in his Aegis Gundam in May mode, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. While you're there, let us know what your favorite brews that need some love for the Set 2 metagame are in the comments.
Fulm and I have touched on the mindset of a brewer in our previous video, and how blue-white dominated the beta format. One of the key aspects covered in that video is the metagame a player expects to play into.
The general community sentiment on the Set 2 metagame at the moment is green-white wing being at the top of the pile, with aggro decks like blue-green and blue-purple following closely behind.
Using this consensus as a baseline for what these brews were trying to exploit, we can see some card choices and meta calls that naturally pair well into what traditional green-white wing and blue aggro are trying to do.
Let's address the elephant, Aegis Gundam in May mode and Athrun Zala. When going for the full length, you're getting a 4 AP, 6 HP, Breach 3 unit that can attack an active enemy unit that is level 5 or lower.
Of course, we could just read out the stats of the card and pilot, but in context, this matches well against the early blocker package of white decks. When paired with Athrun, your MA mode is clearing Gundam Lifrith, Rick Diaz, any token that Striker Pack creates, and even an unpaired Ale-Strike Gundam. That's not to mention how it lines up just as well into most of what a blue aggro shell is throwing your way.
Getting to proactively clear a blocker that white control decks are playing without slamming the brakes on shield pressure is the key here. Breach 3 is doing some heavy work clearing shields and EX bases, or at least half of a base's HP in the process. This allows your MA mode to play double duty, which is necessary because the deck needs to be doing everything in its power to win the game before the white control player gets into their late game bombs. Given how much of this deck folds to Wing Zero's board clearing, speed is safety.
Anecdotally speaking, the wing representation at this event was through the roof. My personal tournament run paired me into 5 wing decks over 9 rounds, and glancing at the tables around me, I'd estimate 10% of all English starter deck wing Gundams ever printed showed up to this event. That's more of a joke, but the saturation of wing decks is not, which perfectly set the stage for this deck to win.
If you think a little bit about what the linked Aegis MA mode brings to the table against early game units smaller than itself, it really isn't that hard to put 2 and 2 together. Attacking into any one of these units kills their unit, breaches, and in May mode even has HP left to spare. This is an insanely good value proposition in favor of the blue-red player. But what if we told you this deck also had the sauce against aggro as well?
Many of this deck's play patterns stand to outvalue other aggro strategies as well. The Aegis Link still works reasonably well here, acting as an Amuro at home to stop an enemy unit in their tracks before it can even swing once. Some cards that immediately come to mind are the opponent's copies of Rick Dom in 1 Year War aggro, and Gundam Barbados First Form in blue-purple aggro. Both of these are examples of cards that give up some of their power budget to cash in Breach 2 and on attack, draw 1, respectively, on the following turn.
If a linked MA mode stops these cards before they can even capitalize on their effect, the opponent is actually just playing an understated vanilla, and that's a little pitiful. Combine some incredible trades with the classic Amuro and RX-78 link, standard pingers like Guntank and Anksha, and a one-size-fits-all solution to Corsica base with Sayla's light-type Guncannon, and we have a real anti-aggro deck on our hands as well.
Gundam Virsago has been on our minds ever since it was spoiled for Set 2. And I've really been wanting for someone to try and make it work. At the Ale-Strike stat line of level 5, 4 cost, 4 AP, and 4 HP, we're getting Breach 1 and a not so restrictive way to ping an opponent's unit for 2. This card is a unique case of not having to give up a whole lot in stats for 2 abilities since it only has Breach 1. But as we all know in practice, there's no difference between Breach 1 and Breach 5 if the opponent has no base to defend them. Virsago seems to be a perfect closer that stops board parity and makes an opening in the game before the opponent has an opportunity to turn the corner at level 6+.
In hindsight, Sayla's light-type Guncannon is a pretty notable tech for this metagame, but remained relatively unexplored as the community seemed to write off red at the start of the format. When the 2 top represented decks of the format are on token units from Corsica base and Striker Pack, it becomes a spicy choice here. The card is obviously most threatening to the Tall Geese and Leo tokens of Corsica base and the Sword Strike token of Striker Pack, along with a whole pile of off-meta small tokens, with all of them dying outright to its effect. However, even larger tokens, like the other two flavors of Strike Token and White Base's RX-78, get put in range to die to other pings available in the deck, or just smashed by the conga line of 2-1-2-2s. So I know what you may be thinking. Given the huge situational upside, what's the stat line of this card?
It's an on-rate vanilla.
No shot.
No cap. This is the exact stat line of vanilla RX-78 and Kshatriya from set 1. Card is cracked and has been under our noses this whole time. Alright, so here's an interesting one. When comparing the winners list to his friend's topping deck, we see a few small differences in builds. Rust TCG made a great video with on-the-floor coverage of both builds. It is linked in the description if you wanted to give it a watch.
BuCUE is present in both lists, and I believe it's the most palatable of the generic support units. It's like if ReZEL gave up 2 AP to inherit the ability to give another unit 2 AP during your turn by resting itself instead. It's also worth noting, the Activate main for support can be used the turn it's played, which allows BuCUE to start being useful immediately, like a mini Link.
There's nothing inherently exciting here outside of just letting one of your Guntanks or 2-1-2-2s trade up. However, when we take a look at the 4th place version of the deck list, here we see Dual Gundam. It gets Breach 3 once it is at 5 AP or more, so it naturally pairs well with the BuCUE play pattern. It is also a generic Zaft link in a pinch, to make sure that your Athruns don't clog in your hand.
With those two utility considerations in mind, Dual Gundam seems like a reasonable pick, potentially even more so if we move to more Vesalius as the base option. This makes breakpoints better over the course of the game and allows a linked Dual Gundam to cross the finish line to 5 AP with the Vesalius pump and getting its tasty Breach 3 payoff.
Corsica base is so pre-Orlando meta. Friendship ended with Corsica base. One cost base that doesn't immediately fold to Sayla's light type Guncannon is my new best friend. Outside of the raw mechanical discussion, I always love when individual players put their personal expression in a build, even if they're only 3 cards different.
Sometimes in order for a deck to become anti-meta in card games, it has to give up one of the traditional labels of aggro, control, mid-range, or combo. After all, if all a deck is trying to do is answer what the popular decks are doing without flopping over and dying in the process, eventually you're just going to hate the meta deck out of the game. A potential Pyrrhic victory. But does the fact that this hypothetical anti-meta pick wins a little slower suddenly make this deck control? Of course not. It's just an anti-meta deck that happens to win a little slower. Much like how a mid-range deck that starts turning cards sideways against control doesn't make it an aggro deck.
It is with great pleasure to announce that this deck doesn't have to give up the traditional aggro package to be anti-meta though. This is an important point, and I believe one of the primary reasons the deck went on an absolute tear. It turns out the deck still operates in the aggro framework of win fast or die fast. Outside of Aegis MA mode and Athrun, we're on the blue aggro package that most of the meta knows and loves. A suite of 2-1-2-2s, the full playset of Pingers and Guntank and Anksha, alongside Starter Gundam with Amuro.
When we get down to the fine print, we're on the blue aggro shell, and the choice of cards gives us just enough anti-meta flair to truly tie everything together in a deck that was perfectly primed for this event.
So Foam, given what we know now, do you think that this deck is now definitively tier 1?
Like most dissatisfying answers, the answer here is, it depends. This is largely a cookie-cutter blue aggro shell, which is repeatedly proven you can plug just about anything low to the ground into the gaps and it works. In that way, I don't think this deck is ever going to have a context where it's outright bad, but having said that, I think this deck is very primed to exploit a specific meta snapshot and is vulnerable itself to being teched against. I'd definitely bring it to my wing-infested scene though.
As someone who likes looking at historical metas of card games, it is interesting to note that this was the last regional for Gundam Card Game Year 1, at least for the foreseeable future. All meta developments for Set 2 are now kept behind the closed doors of local metagames and maybe a couple grassroots tourneys. So while we think the metagame is still developing a little, all future techs and build changes might fly under the radar, and if there are further innovations, they might be contained to small scenes with no spotlight. It's not like that's a bad thing though, because at Side 9 we believe that this level of play and thinking about the game still matters as long as you still care about it.
That's all for today's video. We hope we were able to break down why we thought this deck was perfectly primed for the Orlando Regional this past Saturday. Keep on tuning those decks for locals, and enjoy what we all have left of the Set 2 format before Cambodia gets introduced to the game. Thanks for watching Side 9, and we'll see you next mission.